I heard my sister's voice through the wall before I understood where I was. She was laughing. That's the part I keep coming back to. Not crying, not worried. Laughing, low and careful, the way she used to laugh when she thought she was getting away with something. My name is Tatum. I'm 31 years old, and I'm a licensed property accountant in Vancouver. The people standing in my living room while I lay in St. Paul's Hospital with a fractured skull and a bleed on my brain were my sister and my brother-in-law. And they were not there grieving. They were measuring. 3 weeks before that moment, I had been cycling home from my office on Burrard Street. It was a Tuesday in October, the kind of evening that feels like the city is shutting itself down for the night. Wet leaves on the pavement, headlights blurring in the rain. The last thing I remember is the green light changing, then nothing, then a ceiling I didn't recognize, and a nurse telling me I had been unconscious for 11 days. Traumatic brain injury, subdural hematoma, emergency craniotomy, at Vancouver General, then transferred to St. Paul's for recovery. The doctors used words that sounded like they belonged to someone else's life, but the life they were describing was mine. My parents flew in from Kamloops the day I woke up. My mother held my hand and cried. My father stood near the window with his arms crossed, the way he does when he doesn't know what to do with his emotions. My sister Corinna arrived an hour later with her husband Beau. She hugged me too long. She smelled like my perfume, the one I kept on my bathroom counter at home. I didn't say anything about it. My brain was still slow and foggy, and I told myself I was imagining things. I wasn't. I had bought my condo on Nelson Street 2 years before the accident. 740 square feet, 12th floor, east-facing, with a view of the mountains on clear days. I paid for it outright, not because I'm wealthy, I'm not, but because I had spent 8 years saving obsessively after watching my parents lose their house in a refinancing mess when I was 22. That experience rewired something in me. I don't carry debt. I don't co-sign anything. And I document everything. My grandmother, my mother's mother, passed when I was 26. She left me her jewelry collection and a sum of money that I put directly into a TFSA and never touched. She also left me something else. A letter. Handwritten, notarized, tucked inside a sealed envelope in her lawyer's files in Victoria. I had a copy of that letter in my condo. Not in a drawer. Not in a file folder. Behind the false panel in my storage closet. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a spy movie. It was the kind of thing a person does when they grew up watching money disappear and trust get violated at the kitchen table. My contractor, a friend from university who owed me a favor after I helped him sort out a billing nightmare with a developer, installed it for me when I renovated the unit, a recessed panel in the back wall of the walk-in storage closet, painted to match, no handle, opens with pressure on the left corner. Behind it, a fireproof lockbox bolted to the concrete. Inside that box, my grandmother's original letter, property deeds, backup drives, my insurance documents, a copy of my TFSA beneficiary designations, and cash. Not a fortune. $12,000. But enough. Corinna knew I had a storage closet. She did not know what was in it. Nobody did. While I was unconscious, my parents were appointed as temporary substitute decision-makers for my medical care under British Columbia's Healthcare, Consent, and Care Facility Admission Act. That is a legitimate legal instrument. It allows family to make medical decisions when a patient cannot. What it does not allow, and this is the part that matters, is property management, financial control, estate decisions, none of that. My sister had a different understanding of what the situation meant, or maybe she understood perfectly and decided the risk was worth it. I was transferred to St. Paul's on a Thursday. By the following Monday, Corinna had contacted my building's strata council, introduced herself as my next of kin managing my affairs, and requested access to my unit for the purpose of, quote, retrieving personal effects and ensuring the property was maintained during my incapacity. They let her in. She had ID. She seemed distressed. She had a handwritten note. I found out later it appeared to be my handwriting, but wasn't, requesting that my sister be granted access in the event I was hospitalized. By the time I woke up 11 days later, she had visited my condo at least 4 times. I didn't know any of this at the hospital. I was relearning how to hold a thought for longer than 30 seconds. I was relearning how to walk a straight line without grabbing the wall. My sister sat beside my bed and brought me soup from the place on Davy Street that I liked and told me not to worry about anything. I believed her. For about 9 days, I believed her. The thing that cracked it open was small. My mother mentioned that Corinna had handled the mail. I asked which mail. My mother said, "Oh, you know, bills, that kind of thing." I asked why Corinna was handling my bills when my property management was set to autopay. My mother changed the subject. My father looked out the window again. That night, when the ward was quiet and the lights were dimmed, I asked the nurse to bring me my phone. It had been in a bag with my personal effects since I was admitted. The screen was cracked from the accident, but it still worked. I had a home security system, not a fancy one, a basic setup from a company called Minim 2-door sensors, a window sensor, and a small indoor camera in the corner of my living room that I originally installed because I had a break-in in my previous apartment and never quite recovered the sense of safety. The camera uploaded to a private cloud account. 30 days of rolling footage. My hands were shaking when I logged in. Not from fear. From the thing that happens when you already know what you're going to see and your body understands it before your mind catches up. Corinna. In my living room. With Bo. Standing in front of my bookshelf with her phone out, photographing things. My grandmother's silver candlesticks on the mantel. Gone in the footage from 3 days later. The wool rug I had shipped from a market in Portugal. Rolled up and carried out by Bo on a Sunday afternoon. My grandmother's pearl earrings, the ones I kept in a small ceramic dish on my dresser. I watched Corinna pick them up, turn them over in her palm, and put them in her coat pocket. I watched 40 minutes of footage, then I put my phone face down on the blanket and stared at the ceiling for a long time. My sister is 2 years older than me. When we were children, she used to tell me that the reason our parents liked me better was because I was easier. She said it like it was a fact, not an accusation. Later, when I started making money and she was still bouncing between jobs and borrowing from our parents, the dynamic shifted again. She stopped saying I was easy. She started calling me lucky. She said it with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. I thought about all of that. Lying in that hospital bed, I thought about it carefully, the way I think about numbers. Not with emotion, but with precision. Then I started planning. The first thing I did was call my lawyer. Not my family's lawyer, mine. A woman named Priya. Just kidding. A woman I had retained 2 years earlier when I bought my condo, who I had deliberately kept separate from every family connection I had. I told her what I had seen on the camera footage. I told her about the Strata access. I told her about the note with the forged signature. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "I need you to not say anything to your sister yet." "Can you do that?" I said yes. The second thing I did was access my backup drive remotely. It was one of the drives in the lockbox behind the panel, but I also kept a mirrored copy on an encrypted server I maintained professionally. I was, before my accident, a property accountant. I work with financial records every day. I know how to keep things that can't be taken from me. The server was fine. The files were intact. The third thing I did was nothing. I lay in my hospital bed, and when Corinna came to visit the next morning with coffee and a muffin from the place I liked on Davy Street, I smiled at her. I asked her about Bo. I asked her about the drive back from Vancouver. I let her adjust my pillow. I said thank you. She had no idea. Over the next week, while I continued my physiotherapy and my occupational therapy assessments and my slow, deliberate recovery, my lawyer built the file. The camera footage was time-stamped and backed up. The Strata access logs showed 5 separate visits. A neighbor in my building, an older man named Mr. Botter, Okafor on the 14th floor, who sometimes chatted with me by the mailboxes, confirmed he had seen Corinna and Bo carrying items from my unit on 2 occasions. He had thought it was strange, but assumed I had asked them to store things while I was in hospital. The candlesticks showed up on Facebook Marketplace. My lawyer found them in under 20 minutes. listed by an account with Beau's first name and a photo of a garage that matched the one attached to their townhouse in Burnaby. The listing said, "Silver candlesticks, antique, great condition, no longer needed." The pearl earrings were listed on a local buy and sell group under Corinna's personal account. She hadn't even created a separate profile. She had listed them with the caption, clearing out some extras, "Beautiful vintage pearls." I looked at that listing for a long time. Beautiful vintage pearls. My grandmother had worn those earrings to every family Christmas for 30 years. Then I saw the GoFundMe. My sister had created it 12 days into my hospitalization. The banner image was a photo of me that she had taken at a family dinner 2 summers ago. I was laughing in the picture, completely unaware I would one day be used as a fundraising graphic. The campaign was titled, "Help Tatum Recover, Supporting My Sister Through Traumatic Brain Injury." The description said that my medical bills were mounting and that I had been unable to work and that the family was struggling to support my care. It mentioned that I might need long-term rehabilitation and that the costs were becoming unmanageable. None of that was true. I have employer benefits through the accounting firm where I work, extended health, long-term disability, income replacement. My medical costs at St. Paul's were covered by the BC Provincial Health System. I had no mounting bills. I had no financial crisis. My disability coverage had already kicked in and was replacing 70% of my salary automatically. The GoFundMe had raised just over $42,000. I sat with that number for a long time. $42,000. From people who saw my laughing face and thought they were helping me. Former colleagues, friends of my parents, people I hadn't spoken to in years who saw the post shared somewhere and gave $20 because they felt sorry for the woman in the picture who didn't know any of this was happening to her. I didn't cry about the money. I cried about the photograph, the specific cruelty of choosing a picture of me laughing. Then I dried my eyes and I forwarded the link to my lawyer. There's a particular kind of anger that doesn't feel like anger. It feels like clarity. Like everything that was slightly blurry before, every small doubt, every half-formed suspicion, every uncomfortable family dinner where something felt off but I couldn't name it, suddenly resolves into sharp focus. That's what I felt in those days after I found the GoFundMe. Not rage, resolution. I was discharged from St. Paul's on a Wednesday in November, 23 days after I was admitted. My mother wanted me to come to Kamloops to recover. I told her I was going home. She looked worried. I told her I'd be fine. I took a cab from the hospital because I wasn't ready to see Corinna's face in a car for 40 minutes without being able to leave. I went home. I unlocked my front door, walked inside, and stood in my living room for a moment. The rug was gone. There were rectangles on the shelves where the candlesticks had been. The ceramic dish on my dresser was empty, but the walls were still mine. The kitchen was still mine. The storage closet at the end of the hallway was still closed. I went to the closet. I pressed the left corner of the back panel. It shifted open. The lockbox was exactly where I had left it, untouched, undiscovered, intact. They had been in this condo 5 times and they had never found it. I sat down on the floor of the storage closet and let myself feel the relief for exactly 3 minutes. Then I stood up, opened the box, took out my grandmother's letter, and carried it to my desk. The letter was handwritten in my grandmother's careful cursive, witnessed by her lawyer in Victoria and notarized with a stamp I had memorized years ago. It named me specifically as the recipient of the pearl earrings, the silver candlesticks, and a collection of additional items that my grandmother referred to as the household pieces. It stated clearly that these items were not to be redistributed by any family member without my explicit consent. It included a clause, something her lawyer had suggested and that my grandmother had insisted on, because she had seen enough family money fights in her own generation, stating that any family member who unlawfully disposed of her bequest without the recipient's consent would forfeit any remaining claim to her estate. Corinna was named in my grandmother's will for a separate sum of money, a smaller sum but not nothing. That clause applied to her. My lawyer filed the civil claim the following Monday: wrongful appropriation of personal property, fraudulent misrepresentation, an unauthorized disposition of inherited goods under British Columbia's Law and Equity Act. We also filed a complaint with the BC Society to Prevent Elder Abuse's financial exploitation line, not because my grandmother was living, but because the clause in her estate constituted a form of protected bequest, and there was precedent for treating its violation under adjacent legislation. And we flagged the GoFundMe to the Canadian Anti-Fraud Centre because $42,000 raised under false pretenses is fraud, regardless of who the story was about. The summons was served on a Thursday afternoon. Corinna called me that evening. I almost didn't answer. Then I did. "What is this?" she said. Not a question, a statement of shock. "It's a civil claim," I said. "You've seen one before. You know what it is." "Tatum." Her voice dropped. "We were trying to help. We were trying to help. We didn't know what was going to happen to you. You thought I might not wake up," I said, "and you decided to act on that assumption before you had any confirmation." Silence. "The earrings are listed on your personal Facebook account," I said. "The candlesticks are on Marketplace under Beau's name. The GoFundMe raised $42,000 based on expenses that don't exist. My disability coverage is documented. My hospital bills were covered by BC Health. I have all of it." She was quiet for a long time. "I was going to tell you. The camera footage is also documented," I said. 5 visits. Time-stamped. "I have a neighbor who will provide a written statement." More silence. "I'm going to need you to not contact me outside of the legal process," I said. "Good night." I hung up. The hearing wasn't dramatic. Provincial court doesn't have the energy of a television courtroom. It's fluorescent lights and stacking chairs and a judge who has seen 100 versions of the same story. But the documents were what they were. The camera footage was what it was. The Facebook listings were screenshotted and printed and filed with the court. When Corinna's lawyer tried to argue that she had acted in good faith in my interest during my incapacity, my lawyer placed the GoFundMe documentation on the table. Then the BC Health coverage confirmation. Then the long-term disability payout records. Then the time-stamped footage of Beau carrying my wool rug out of my building on a Sunday afternoon while I was sedated in an ICU. The judge ordered full restitution of all removed items or their assessed market value, repayment of the GoFundMe proceeds to the donors, or, where unrecoverable, to me directly, and a referral to Crown Counsel for review of potential fraud charges under the Criminal Code of Canada. Then my lawyer presented my grandmother's letter. The judge reviewed the clause. He looked at Corinna. He looked back at the letter. He made a note. 3 weeks later, my grandmother's estate lawyer in Victoria confirmed that under the forfeiture clause, Corinna's inheritance from the estate, the separate sum my grandmother had left her, had been transferred in full to me. It wasn't about the money. I want to be clear about that. I would have given Corinna every cent of that inheritance if she had called me while I was recovering and said, "I made a mistake. I panicked. I'm sorry." I would have found a way to understand it. Families do terrible things when they're afraid. I know that. I grew up in one. But she didn't call to apologize. She called to negotiate. And by the time she called, the documents were already filed. My parents were quiet for a long time after the ruling. My mother called me once. She didn't defend Corinna exactly. She said things like, "You have to understand how scared we all were," and she thought she was being practical. I listened. I didn't argue. When she was finished, I said, "I understand that you were scared. What happened to me was frightening, but being scared doesn't transfer ownership of someone else's belongings." And then I said goodbye. That was 4 months ago. I'm back at work now, part-time at first, and then full-time starting in January. My physiotherapist says my balance is nearly back to baseline. I still get headaches. I still don't like cycling in the rain. I probably won't for a long time. The rug came back. The candlesticks came back. Beau returned them in a cardboard box left outside my building with no note. The pearl earrings had already been sold to someone in Surrey. The assessed value was paid to me through the restitution order. I used the money to have a local jeweler in Gastown Make me something new from the description in my grandmother's letter. It isn't the same. Nothing is the same as the thing itself. But I still have the letter. It's back in the lockbox behind the panel in the storage closet at the end of the hall. Some people build walls to keep others out. I built one to keep my own things safe. I just didn't know which threat to prepare for. It turns out it doesn't matter. The door's the same either way, and I'm the only one who knows how to open it.